Hey guys, welcome to Code Decode. In this video, we are going to cover Java full stack interview questions. In this video, we are going to touch each and every aspect and major topics of a full stack Java developer's life. For example, we are going to cover the core Java part. We are going to cover database. We are going to cover front end with Angular. We are going to cover how do you integrate your backend with front end. We are going to see how to debug the issues when front end is not able to reach the backend and such kind of issues in the pod, in Kubernetes, also in the local. We will also see how to do CI/CD with both Angular and backend as Java. We will also see the deployment strategies. So let's get started and see into all of these topics. Let's start with simple core Java. Why is class immutable and what is the use of this immutability in your life? A class is immutable whose instance cannot be changed after once it is created. Once the object is created, it is final, its state cannot be modified and cannot be changed. And how would you make a class immutable? To make a class immutable, you have to make the class as final. You have to make all the variables as private and final. You have to make sure you don't have any setters, you just have only getters. Fourth, initialize all the properties in the constructor like this. Fifth, keep a defensive copies for the mutable fields. For example, this is just a string here and integer here, that's fine. But if you have any address kinds of custom field, then make sure that you just return a new object of it. Do a duplicate or clone of it, the deep clone of it. Do not return the shallow clone or the reference of it, which can be modified and which can make your immutable class, which looks like an immutable but becomes a mutable one. Because if person has an address class and you return that address reference, somebody change the address or the city into that address, then your person who looks to be immutable class becomes a mutable one because address has been changed in your immutable class. And if any part of the immutable class is changed, it does not remain immutable, it becomes a mutable class. So make sure if you have any custom object into it, you always return a deep copy everything into it and then return it into the getters that you have here. And return the same if you have any object or a method which returns that object. For example, there is a method which initiates your age with this particular new age. Then you don't just give this dot age equals to this. Rather, you create a new person class, add the name as it is, create a new age, and then return that person, the new object into it. So don't allow methods to modify the state of your immutable class. Every method should return a new object instead of altering one. Now you would ask me, wow, so great, you have created an immutable class, but why immutable? What is the usage of that in real life? In Java, string class, immutability is for security reasons. For example, if you're using some passwords, you want to authenticate using that password, but by mistake, you have modified the password with some value. And then you won't have the access of that value if it is done by any hacker. So this is a huge security risk because the security is hampered when you can modify your passwords like this. You should not allow anybody to change your password except through the proper procedure and process. Second is in the concurrent application. Suppose in the transaction type applications, if you have created a balance of 100 rupees and you want to add 500 to your balance, then the updated balance will be 600 rupees. But if you want to see what was your initial balance, then that can be easily done with a new keyword and keeping that money object as the immutable one, so that you can always have immutable balance and avoid any race condition. But if you want to see the updated one, you can always get the updated balance. Third is caching. Remember, whenever you have a cache, you have a key value pair. And in the case of key value pairs or hash-based collections, keys should always be immutable because key is a unique identifier for the value that you have in the map. If you change the key, your value will be lost. Suppose, if you're a postman, that address becomes your key. And the value is the person who lives there to whom you want to hand over that postal card to. If the address changes, you will not be able to reach that person. And this is exactly the same key is for you in a hash map. It is the exact unique identifier and the location for your value there where you want to reach to. If your key is modified or mutated, you are lost. And hence the keys in the hash-based collection should always be immutable. Fourth is a domain-driven design. Objects like value and money and address. Suppose an address is a proper address like this. but you want to change and add a new address, then always try to make it immutable, because these are value objects who holds the real business rule, who handles your business. If you change it, it can have a lot of side effects. A functional programming, a very good example of immutability advantage in Java. Suppose you have a list of numbers 1, 2, 3. You map each number with the n into n. So now the list becomes 1, 4, and 3 into 3 becomes 9. That is a new list, that is a squared list. If it is immutable, then your numbers list still remains 1, 2, 3. You don't have to worry about it, that you have internally mapped each and every object to its squared number. If it would have been mutable, you will be in trouble, because you end up mapping each and every number with its own square. And if you want to work something upon the old number list, you are lost. And hence it prevents accidental modification while processing in the whole big pipeline. The configuration objects like environment variables, keys must never change, and it should always be immutable for you, because the keys are also the key value pair. If you change the key, your value will be lost completely. So in short, immutability gives you safety, simplicity, and reliability. But what comes is at the cost of flexibility, because you're not allowed to change it. If I want to change my password directly, I cannot do it. I have to go through a whole process of it. So that is why, to prevent the mutation, to have more safety and reliability, most of the Java internal classes like wrapper classes, integer, the inbuilt classes like string, local date, all of these are created immutable for the safety reason by Java people for you. Hey guys, recently we have launched a course covering an end-to-end full stack application using Angular as front end and microservices and Spring Boot as the back end. Also, we have used Cloud to deploy this application, and we have used CI/CD, that is Jenkins and Argo CD, for continuous integration and continuous deployment. The technologies that we have used is REST, RESTful web services, Spring Boot and microservices for backend, Angular for front end. GitHub we have used for version control system. Also, to make the code unit testable, we have used JUnits. We have used Sonar for code quality checks. Also, for containerization, we have used Docker and Kubernetes. And to deploy this whole application, we have used AWS and multiple services from AWS. Also, we have used SQL as well as NoSQL, that is MongoDB and SQL. On AWS, since for the SQL we have RDS, we have used those services, and Jenkins and Argo CD for CI/CD pipeline. Also, this is an architecture of the application that we have created, where the front end is Angular and the back end is microservices. We have used ALB load balancers, Ingress for routing and load balancing. And we have used SQL and MongoDB for SQL and NoSQL DB management with Eureka Server and all those microservices counterparts. Now, this is the CI/CD pipeline. This is the CI/CD flowchart for the application that we have created on local. So this is something, a flow when you create an application in local, push it to GitHub, create a Jenkins pipeline, and do the CI/CD using Jenkins and Argo CD. And at the end, deploy the whole code at AWS EKS. Complete description of this course is covered in a very separate video. The link for that video is also given in the description bar below. And also the link to purchase that course from Udemy is also in the description bar below. So please go and check the description for all these links. That was a question about the core Java. Now coming to the Spring Boot and microservice question. A very important question which most of the developers are being asked is, how do you structure your microservice? What are the main components of your microservice? So there's a proper clear separation of concerns when it comes to microservice. They have clearly stated that you should have at least these many folders in your Spring application. That is, you should always have one application.java which kickstarts your Spring Boot application. Then you should always have a controller to handle all your REST endpoints. You should have a service layer to write the business logic. You should always have the repository layer to have your data access or ORM implementation, that is to connection to database like JP or Hibernate. You should always have your models like entities and DTOs. You should never exploit the entities into REST endpoints, and you should never use DTOs to be saved into database. The entities and DTOs have their own specific significances. Also, you should have an exception class where you can handle your custom and global exception handlers. You can have your utilities all added in one single place. You should always have mapper to convert your entity to DTO and DTO to entity to use it in the proper place. Also, you should at last have a config folder where all your configuration specific things, like if you want to have interceptors, if you want to have filters like security filter, if you want to have Swagger implementation, you have to have bean creations, all those configurations goes into this config folder. So whenever you go to an interview and you are asked about the structure, always mention at least these many folders, because these are the best practices to have in a Spring Boot application. Each layer has a single responsibility, and whenever I want to find something, I'll easily find it then and there. The second important structured decision we have taken in a microservice application is that we should always use DTOs and the mappers. You should never use your internal entities to be exposed to your client, because going forward, if a column is to be added for logging or auditing purpose, your front end also has to add that logger, because if your entities are directly mapped to your front end applications folder or the POJOs, then you will be in great trouble. So always make sure you have entities at the database layer and you have proper mapper to convert those entities to DTOs and then return that DTO to your front end application like Angular. Also make sure that in creating the structure for microservice, you have a proper exception handling. Try to have the global exception handler where all the resource not found exceptions are handled in this way and given a response in a proper user friendly exception messages like we are doing it here. The fourth is always try to externalize your configuration. You should never hard code your properties in your Spring Boot application. You should always have your application.properties application, dev.properties application, test.properties, prod.properties and all. Always try to create a separate config server if you have multiple microservice and all of them have common properties into them. So try to use the config server as much as possible if it is a microservice application. Always try to use a proper dependency injection. You should always rely on interfaces and not the implementation, and try to always create like order service implements, order service IMPL implements order service and keep the abstraction layer, so that going forward, your order service IMPL logic might change, but the thing that you're trying to do with orders, like place order, get order, all the basic functionality always remains the same in order service. They never changes. Your business logic and your code and logic can always change, and hence should always be abstracted out. So you should know what you want to do and should be in an interface. Then you should create an implementation where you can say always connect to PostgreSQL, get the data for orders. Or going forward, you want to change it, you can always change your order service IMPL or repository IMPL and get the data from MySQL rather than PostgreSQL. So keep your interfaces very separate from your implementations, because your interfaces tell you what you have to do. Your service IMPLs and repository IMPLs tells you how you have to do. So you always make sure what you want to do is segregated from how you want to do. Your logging and monitoring should also be properly structured. Use SLF4j or logback or the sleuth, this proper micrometer tracing and everything for proper monitoring and health matrices. Always do testing when it comes to microservice application. The JUnits you can use integration testing, smoke testing. You should always use Swagger and OpenAPI for your proper documentation, which you can share with your Angular application, guys. You should always have the database best practices also created, where if you have a proper Spring Boot microservice structuring created properly, you should always have your service having only the business logic and repository having only the database connection and retrieval and saver logic, not the business logic. Always try to modularize your large application. So maintainability in Spring Boot comes from clean package structure, DTOs and mappers, a proper exception handling mechanism being implemented, external configuration for no hard coding, proper logging, monitoring and testing, proper documentation with Swagger, which you can always share the contract with your front end guys to be able to map to your proper requests and responses. Always follow solid principles to keep business logic isolated in service and keep your repository layer completely separated. The third important question when it comes to the backend part is how do you handle configurations across environments? This is going to be going forward linked with Angular also, okay? So to handle the configurations, the very basic answer that any starter level developer would give is that the Spring Boot profiles are supported out of the box. That is, you can always have application.yaml, application dev.yaml, application prod.yaml, application test.yaml. And this is how you provide the default property. You can also provide this as an environment variable to the pod if you're deploying it in Kubernetes. That the Spring Profile active should be prod if it is a prod pod. It should be test if it is a testing pod, and so on. You can have your dev specific URLs and your prod specific URLs and your proper specific profiles. The second very important thing is you should not just hard code all these secrets. The secrets can also come, or some kinds of properties can also come from environment variables. If it is a pod, you can also get this from the config maps. You can get it from the system properties. You can also get it from the file which is outside the jar, so that you don't have to deploy your jar again and again. You can just use any file like application prod.yaml which is outside of your jar. So it prevents kind of lots of deployment of the jar again and again if you don't bind both of them together. The third very important thing is, if you're using microservice, try to use the distributed systems, the centralized configuration management like this, where the config server supports all the dynamic refreshes without the restart, and it is great for microservices. The fourth important part for secret management is you can use the Azure Key Vault, you can use AWS Secret Manager, you can use Kubernetes secrets also if it is deployed in K8 and can be used with this way. The fifth very important part is, if you use Docker Kubernetes configurations, you can use config maps for environment configurations and secrets for passwords and key like this. And you can mount them as environment variables or external files. So best practices: keep the common configurations in YAML file, override any differences in the specific prod or the test files. For example, the DB connections for prod and test will be different, so you can not keep them in the common application.yaml file. You can keep them in separate URLs and connection strings in separate application dev YAML and application prod YAML. Store always the sensitive information in secret managers and not directly in the Git, which is viewable by hackers easily. Use multiple microservices for centralized configuration servers. Prefer environment variables. And use Spring HV2 to verify which config is available at what time. So if you have profiles, switch configs per environment. You want to override without rebuilding, use externalized configurations. Keep it in a property file like application.yaml and keep it outside the jar. If you want to have a centralized management service for all the microservices to handle their properties, you can have the config server. To handle and secure the sensitive information, always use key vaults. If you're using Docker and Kubernetes, try to use config maps and secrets for environment and secret management. So in short, for the smaller profiles, go for application.yaml files. For big and diversified microservices, go for config server and key vault for enterprise level microservices. And if you're using Docker Kubernetes, try to use config maps, the environment variables for cloud native APIs. Now coming to front end, here I'm going to discuss some front end about Angular. Okay, so how from Angular you give a REST API call to your backend Java application, and how do you handle the retries and errors? Now this is a very important question. Going forward, what all integration questions we are going to cover is going to check the real practical knowledge you have, and we'll see if you really have worked with the REST endpoints in backend and the Angular as the front end. So for the front end part, first of all, import the HTTP client module, which brings all the HTTP functionality in the Angular's module. Then you have to register your module so that HTTP client is available for all your clients and services, components and services, and then enable the HTTP request through your Angular app. The second thing that is very important that you need to do is, now you import it like this. You have already imported and made a part of your ng module with imports. Now to use it in a component, you have to import it like this. The second important thing is you have to make it injectable provide and root. That means this service is now a global service and will be available for injection easily, dependency injection easily. Now inject the HTTP client in the constructor as a private variable, and then call this particular HTTP to give a call to your base URL for getting users, getting one user, getting all the users and all those things, and creating the users. Remember, these methods always give you a return which is observable, which you can subscribe. I'll tell you how. So right now what we have seen is, this is how you have your HTTP module implemented. This is how you use this HTTP client to give a call to your backend. Then how in the front end you subscribe to it. So this http.get method gives you an observable. You create a pipe over it and check whether there is an error thrown. If it is an error thrown, throw an error saying failed to load users. So you send the HTTP request to fetch all the users, it returns you an observable. So this get users returns you an observable on which you can open the pipe and add the error handling operators from RxJX, and if it is failure, intercept it. Log it to the console and then again emit a custom error or user friendly exception saying failed to load users to the subscribers. So this helps you in gracefully handling the errors with RxJX catch error mechanism, which gracefully handles HTTP errors without crashing the apps. The observable emits an error which handles using .subscribe, and recommended modern syntax for handling is to throw an error after logging it. There is also a beautiful retry mechanism available in Angular whenever you are connecting with a REST endpoints, because there can be chances that it is down or it is temporary down because Kubernetes pods are made crashable. So it is expected and it is believable that your pod might crash a lot. But it will come up very soon. So what you have to do is retry after some time and then try is it truly failing. So you retry it 3 times. So how do you retry it? You give a HTTP call to the get endpoint of this user with the base URL. You get an observable out of this. On an observable, you create a pipe. You retry it. If it is still not possible, you catch the error, log the error, throw the error saying API failed even after retries. So this is useful for transition errors like network issues or the pod crashing. It also let the component know that the request is failed, but in a controlled way that I tried 3 times, but it is failing. I'm sorry. And also you can handle errors with .subscribe and async pipeline. The very beautiful way, another centralized error handling and retry mechanism is using the HTTP interceptor, which is available in the Angular common HTTP package. What you do here is you implement HTTP interceptor like this. And what does interceptor do? It sits between your backend application and your front-end app. So every request which is coming between them is intercepted and can easily modify the request and handle the responses globally. It handles the request, it retries it twice, it catches the error, throw unauthorized, redirect it to login, and then throw an error. So this intercept method is going to intercept your outgoing HTTP request. It passes the request to the handler using the backend Java. It runs and returns an observable. If there is an error, it tries automatically 2 times. If there is still no response, even after retry, give a custom logic, detect the exception, detect 401 also, and trigger the global exception handling, and also rethrow the exception. So why do we use interceptor if we can do it in this way also? In get user service class also, we use this interceptor. Reason being, it is a centralized error handling mechanism. No need to repeat the catch error in every services. There are automatically retries happening. It can handle transition network issues globally, and all the request and response modifications can be done. You can use add auth tokens and headers also internally with these HTTP interceptors. Now, how do you consume your data? You get the users. What you get out of this get users is again an observable which you can subscribe to. And for each data, you can add the data, or if it is an error, you can give the error message. It is essential because HTTP returns an observable, so subscription is very important. Then you handle this errors and success like this, keeping the UI reactive to API results and runs it in on init. That means as soon as the data is fetched after component initialization, you can do it. I have a very, very big content ready for these lifecycle methods of Angular. If you want to know, I can show that also to you. So here you can see I have the content ready for Angular component lifecycle hooks, like what is on ng on change, what is ng on it, why is it called after ng on change, why not before ng on in it, what is ng do check, what is different between ng do check and ng on change, what is ng content in it, what is ng content after content in it, how is it different from both, what is ng after content check, and a lot of things with proper analogy, like walk around the house few minutes, check what is changed. If it is ng after content check, then it is just the guest area check every time, not the whole house check whether there is change happening. So I have a lot of things to cover. Let me know in the comment section if you need another video, a separate video on Angular lifecycle hooks. So in the summary, How do your front end Angular application connects with the REST endpoint to your backend application is you use HTTP client for your REST calls. You encapsulate the HTTP calls in services. Your service http.getAPI results into observable which has to be subscribed. Once it is subscribed, you can always handle your RxJX errors with using the try catch. Actually, the try catch is in Java. You can use it using the catch error block. The catch error block, you can log it and then throw it again. You can also have the resiliency and transient failures with retry, like how many times you want to retry. You can also have a centralized logic in the interceptors, and in the components you have to subscribe for the proper handling. In short, service management API logic interception handles the cross-cutting concerns, and RxJS operates, manages, and handles your errors and retries. The very important aspect of a full stack developer application is where did you use database, where did you use NoSQL database, and where did you use SQLDB. So the very big question is NoSQL versus SQL in full stack development app. The answer is the relational databases like MySQL, PostgreSQL, MariaDB are used where the tables and columns are properly structured. There is a strong asset consistency needed, where a proper join and complex queries are also in demand, and you have a fixed schema. There is no changing properties. For example, the banking transaction. A transaction will have start date, the transaction ID, the amount withdrawal or amount credited, what transaction is actually done, from which account number to which account number. For any transaction at given point of time, these columns will never change, and hence it is a structured schema. You don't have to go for non-structured schema or NoSQL. For example, the order processing also is considered as SQL based more, because there is a data with relationships. Customers place order and customer does the payment. So there are complex in SQL queries and joins whenever you have to process your orders. So RDBMS are good for payments and order kinds of microservice to ensure asset properties like ensure consistency. The NoSQL DB are very good for less flexible schemas or schema-less schemas. There's a horizontal scalability always available. You can always have the eventual consistency with NoSQL DB. And it is very optimized for specific access patterns like document or key value aspect of data fetch. The best use case is unstructured data like user profiles, or you can have it for the product details also. A product, if it is an electronic product, it will have a complete different columns. If it is a household product, the properties will be completely different. So in this case, you can always have unstructured data for product details API. So you can always use NoSQL DB here. Also, if you have read or write heavy applications and caching is needed and it's a very high traffic, always go for NoSQL DB, because you don't have to have the time for multiple complex joins. You need views to be created, and then you want quickly data to be available to you, because it is a high front end application for you. You can always go for hybrid approach also. So if it is a e-commerce website, for authentication and payments, you can go for strong consistency, that is RDBMS. For profile management, user management, product database management, or product content management, you can go for NoSQL DB. For logging in analytics, you can go for Elasticsearch. For caching also, since it is really required at the very extremely fast retrieval, NoSQL Redis is good. And if it is a Facebook kind of application, you can always go with NoSQL DB. So the guidelines for choosing is a consistency critical, then RDBMS. If it is flexible, evolving, hierarchical, unstructured data, go for NoSQL. If it is performance needed and caching is needed in a very high way, go for NoSQL. If it is analytics and reporting, always go with the RDBMS with special analytical DB, like OLAP or something. It is there for reporting part. Now, a very important aspect of full stack Java developer question, that is DevOps and CI/CD. A very good question is, how would you set up a CI/CD for Java and Angular microservice project? 90% of the people give it a wrong answer, because either they have worked with CI/CD of Java or they have worked with CI/CD of Angular, but they don't know how to handle both of them together. If you are a full stack developer, you should know how to deploy with CI/CD end to end both the applications together. So even if you have not worked it, just mug this question up and it will be good to go. for the important aspect of CI/CD, the very first thing is version control. So we are using GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket to handle the versioning of our code base, be it both front end and back end. Both of them exist in the root folder. Like this is the backend, this is the front end readme.md file. You can always use feature branches and pull requests for your code reviews, and CI/CD part remains the same. I'm not going to get into it. I have too much to cover. The second important aspect of the full stack developers CI part is you have tools like Jenkins, GitHub Actions, CI, GitLab CI, Circle CI. What you do is, this part is what is the most important part. We should know what are the steps you can do for proper CI of full stack application. First, you should check out the code, pull the latest commits. That means you should have now the front end and back end code, all of them together as it is in the root folder. Now you build the backend application using Java compile, Java run test, MVN clean install, and Gradle build or Gradle build. If it is Maven, use this. If it is Gradle, use this. After that, once you have the backend compiled, now you compile your front end using ng build and the variable as the environment variable as prod or test or UAT, whatever. Then you run the test for both backend and front end, because now your compilation errors are now resolved. You run the test cases. Once that is done, run the Sonar Cube for quality check, and then the very important part of CI. Create the Docker images and push it to the repository like Docker Hub or JFrog repository or anywhere else. An example of GitHub Actions is, this is the name of your GitHub Action workflow. On the master branch push, what you should do? You should use these steps. Check out the code, set up JDK. This checkout code will give you both backend and frontend. Now you build the backend code, set up Java with Java version 17 and run clean install on your backend. Now set up Node.js for your frontend. Set up the node with version 3 for your actions, and the node version should be 20, and npm install and npm run build. Now run your test cases, and this is what these 4 or 5 things are. Then you can always have the quality checks and build and tag pushing. Now CD is where in the first part of CI you have created the Docker images and you have pushed to some JFrog or Docker repository. Now from there it is a task of CD, that is a deployment part, to fetch the latest image and create a new pod or spin up a new pod in Kubernetes. Now you can use Jenkins, GitHub Actions, Argo CD, Code Pipeline for AWS, Spinnaker, anything for spinning up your pods. So now your Docker image is pushed in any of the repositories. You deploy in different particular environments. It can be dev, staging, or prod. Either you can use Kubernetes or you can use Docker Compose or VM deployments, which is very, very less common. Rarely of us now use the VM deployments, because now most of the clouds gives you Kubernetes support like AKS, who internally with Argo CD help will be able to fetch the latest image, create a hook on those particular repositories, see, oh, there's a new version image available. Now I should destroy the existing pod, create and spin up a new pod. You can always do the smoke and integration testing. An example of this Kubernetes deployment flow is that each microservice has its own deployment or service YAML files. As soon as CI pushes the new Docker image, the CD task is to update the deployments or crash the pod, terminate the pod, spin up a new pod using the new image, using the Argo CD auto sync possibility. Also make sure that after CI/CD part, you have to make sure that you have different deployments. You should have automatic deployments for dev. You should manual have approvals and passing all test cases for staging. And for prod, you should always use blue, green or canary deployment, so that there is a very less of maintenance time for your end users. The best practices is CI/CD, automate everything. Build, test, deploy. Everything should be automated in your pipelines. There should be a fail fast. That is, as soon as if any of the test fails, do not allow the deployment or CD to kick in. Fail fast. As soon as your compilation fails, stop then and there. Ask the user to first fix your compilation issues, then fix your Sonar issues, fix your test issues. Only and only if CI passes, then CD should be allowed. So there should be always this automation check that CI should always be passing before CD happens. The version artifact, that is, you should always tag your Docker images with the commit SSH, so that if you want to revert it, you should know which commit you want to revert to. You should always use infrastructure as code like Terraforms. You should not always go and create the Azure or AWS resources as it is. You should always use Terraform to create these structures into it. For example, if you want to create a key vault, you should have a proper key value pair there, and using Terraforms, you should be able to push your secrets into key vaults. You should always have separate CI and CD pipelines. Always it is good to have CI and CD pipelines for backend and frontend as segregated if possible. It is okay to have it together also, but you try to orchestrate it together rather than run it together. Only the orchestration should be done together, that you go build it, you go build backend, you go build frontend. But the running of those should not happen together. Also, you should monitor your deployments with proper health checks and alerts. So summary is, you should always have a version controls tool like Git or GitLabs or Bitbucket. You should always use CI and CD with Jenkins or GitHub Actions. For CD, you can have Argo CD or K8s. For artifacts, you can have your proper Docker Hub or JFrog. For monitoring, you can use Prometheus and Grafana. So in short, CI is build, test and Dockerize. CD is deploy and test. And automation is to ensure the reliability. Now, a very important aspect of full stack. How do you communicate? The first part is where we have seen from the Angular perspective. What all code based you should use, how to handle retries, how to handle success, how to log the errors, how to have interceptors. Now it is on a whole application based. How does your Angular application communicate your backend application? 90% time we use synchronous communication. We can also use Kafka for async communication also. But for synchronous communication, this code is something which you already know. There is a service which is provided globally. You inject your HTTP client like this. You create an observable over it and you use that to post and get your request, and the return type is observable. Now, the important part is how do you handle it in your backend also. You have a REST controller to handle your front-end request. So the thing that you have created here, the get endpoint, should be available as a get endpoint here in your backend. So Angular sends the HTTP request in the JSON and it is hit by Angular to your backend. Now Spring Boot as a backend parses your JSON into Java object and responds with a proper JSON again, which by having observable as a return type in Angular, it has to subscribe to it, and as soon as it subscribes it, the Spring Boot application, as soon as it sends the response, Angular pulls it using the subscription and then uses that JSON, parse it, create a proper response DTO and send it back. The third important thing is how do you handle the cross-origin request. Now this is a very important part. Now Angular runs on localhost 4200. Your backend runs on localhost 8080. I'll tell you if it is deployed on Kubernetes pod, how do you handle the course there also. Now to enable the course, you can enable it like this. Like if it is you are developing in local, you can have enable the cross-origin and enable this HTTP localhost 4200. There is also a beautiful way which is better, which is a global way, that in your web configurations, you can add the course mapping for allowing this localhost 4200. So the data flow will be Angular gives a call with an HTTP method. The request goes to Spring Boot REST controller. The REST controller already have the course enabled, which will allow the course, it will not block it. So it will give a call to service layer, repository layer. It fetches the data, this controller collects the response in the JSON format, sends it to Angular. Angular subscribe to this, and then as soon as it gets the response, it creates its custom response DTO and updates the UI based on the response you give. Now the optional enhancement always for both of the communication is make sure that Angular sends the token, a proper JWT token in the authorization header, and it should be the task of the backend, that is Spring Boot, to either offline or online validate that token. You should also have the pagination logic available for your backend and front-end communication. First of all, what is course? And how would you resolve course during integration? Now, course is cross-origin resource sharing. It is a browser security feature which restricts the web application to make the request to different domain, protocol or port. If any of those, the domain, the protocol, this is the domain, this is the protocol, and this is the port. If any of those three things changes, then the course issue will come. And how do you fix it? Using the cross-origin request. Browser considers this cross-origin as the security issue, and hence the browser will block all the requests you are trying to give from front end to back end, and your request which is now in the Chrome will never be able to hit your back end, because the layer between the front end and the back end, that is browser, stops and blocks it. And how would you resolve it? You can use @cross origin and allow your origins, but this is not a good way, because if you are on the pod have dynamic IPs, you can never have the origins like this. Origins are actually the allowed front end URLs. But you can use origin as star, but this is not a recommended way, because for production, you will any even hacker from the another origin can allow to be accessed. The better way is enable global CORS configuration. So if multiple controller needed CORS, you can always add the allowed origins as like these. But again, it is also not a good way. The best way is the security config implementation. So for sure, if you have a Spring Boot application, Spring Security is compulsory for enterprise level application. There you can have your http.cores, and this is where you can have your configurations here like this. And in the front end configuration, make sure you use the correct URL and you will be good, because your course is now implemented at the browser security for Blocker. Your backend will be able to fetch it. And since your local host is same, that is domain is same, but your port is different, that is 4200 and 8080. That is why you are trying to face the cross origin issue, which is expected and which should happen, but it is can easily resolved with the course applications. Always a very big star. Never try to bypass it in front end, because it only works in dev via proxies. In production, you will never be able to bypass it. Now, a very good question which comes just after this is, it is all fine and local. What happens in the pod environment? So suppose your Angular front end application is deployed at front end app SVC cluster local. This is a Kubernetes service. Your backend is deployed as user service default SVC cluster local, and this. Even though you can see that they are in the same cluster, still browser sees it as a different origin, because even though your protocol is same, your domain is different and your port is different. And hence, the front end URL, which sees as myapplication.com, the backend URL is api.example.com. It sees origin is myapp.example.com. It is giving a request to a different domain as api.example.com. It is a cross domain, cross origin for sure. And without the proper course headers, the browser will block the API calls. So now from browser, there is a request going to backend. And from backend, there is a response coming to browser. Browser will block both of them, request as well as response. So you have to make sure in the response, you give the course headers. And in the request, you have to make sure you have to bypass it in the following ways. You can allow the cross origins and allowed origins like this in the public URLs, where you allow the front end application, and then it says, oh, the place it is trying to hit is having an interceptor, and it has already allowed this front end to able to hit it. So their data, which is in backend, is secured for this application. So I will allow it. And that is what browser allows the cross origins. So in Kubernetes, the flow goes like this. There's a user browser like Chrome. It gives a request. It creates the nginx build.pod. Then it gives a request to backend pod. It creates the response and add the course header, so that the response is not then blocked by Chrome. And then this browser accepts the response. So backend pod for sure must return a course header. Otherwise, blocker is the browser. It will block the response. This applies even if pods are in the same cluster, because the browser enforces cross-origin rules based on URL and not on the pod level. The cores are always relevant when front-end and back-end are in different origins. In containerized microservices, browser sees ingress as the host name. Now, the proper course configurations prevents the blocking, and for multi-environment, maintain the proper environment-specific URLs. So that was all about the course issue when it comes to both full-stack applications. Now, the very important question, how do you handle different environments in Angular or front-end? We have seen handling of environments in backend. That is, we did profiling based on dev, prod. We did external configuration. We did prod-based configurations with config maps and Kubernetes and Docker if it is used. Also, we have seen config server. When it comes to Angular, you have different ways. In SRC, you can create your environments folder. In that, you can create environment.ts file, environment test.ts file, environment prod.ts file. And then there is a constant to be created with environment where you can have your API URLs. And this API URL is different for all the files. Like for the test, that is environment.ts file, the API URL is test file. In environment test.file, it is a test pod URL. In prod, it is a prod URL. Now, how do you use it? You inject your environment variable like this from an environments folder, and then you just use environment.api URL. And this is how Angular will automatically get the correct environment based on the build. And how do you send the proper build configuration? During the ng build, you give the configuration as test or you give the configuration as production. Also in angular.json, you can define that during production, you replace this environment.ts file with environment prod file, and if it is test, the configuration is test, then please replace the environment.ts file with environment test.ts file. So it will be happening dynamically. Also, if you want to have the dynamic environments at runtime, you can containerize the deployments. The backend URL is always not known at the dynamic time, so you can fetch that at runtime using JSON config file served along with the front end. For example, there is a asset/config.json. There you can provide the URL at runtime and you can load it at in app.modular served during making the HTTP request calls. So the best practice is never hard code the URLs in Angular. Also use different environment files for different applications. For different environments, use different environment files, like similar to what we have done in backend. Combine it with CORS. And for containerized application, try to give the runtime configurations dynamically. Now, a very important aspect: how do you debug integration issue between Angular and Spring Boot? If you're trying to run and test locally, your front end is not able to communicate with backend properly, what things you have to check? First of all, check the network. Open the developer tool in your Chrome. See if the front end is actually sending the correct URL to your backend. Check the method, get, post or put. Check the status code. What is the status code? And that only tells you 90% issue where it lies. If it is 200, okay, and the response is proper, but you're not able to pass it into proper custom DTO, then it is your problem at Angular. If it is 404, the data is not present in backend. If it is 0 or CORS error, then your browser has blocked your request. Your response either does not have the CORS header, or your Spring security is not properly configured for CORS. Check for the CORS issue either in the @cross-origin or in the Spring security. Check the backend logs, whether what kind of error does the request from the front end really reach the backend or not. Validate the contract using the Swagger. Check the front end code. Debug with proper breakpoints. Add the breakpoints in Chrome debugger. Add the proper breakpoints in the IntelliJ or STS. I will prefer IntelliJ. Then check the property files. Use logging and observables like this, and then optionally you can use multiple other testing independent like this. So summary is: check the network, check the CORS, check backend logs, check the contract, front end check using debuggers, check the proxies, and have the proper error handling done by observables. So most of the Angular and Spring Boot integration issues are because either the contract mismatches, or the URL mismatches, or the request and respond payload mismatches, or the CORS issue. Only these 4-5 issues are where your front end cannot be connecting with your backend. I think that is all. I have many more things to cover, like how do you deploy it, the proper configurations, like what should be the ingress, what should be the external configurations, why you should deploy front end and backend independently, why you should not deploy them together. There is even much more things to be covered. If you can see here, Angular front end applications, the medium size Angular app, how to manage them, how to have the proper okay, this is already covered. How do you have the SSR Angular or universal? Many things I have to cover. If you want the second and third part of it, let me know in the comment section. Then only I'll create the second and third part of this full stack Java interview questions. Thank you.